Voyager 1 was never meant to be a survivor of this magnitude because in the cold and unforgiving vacuum of interstellar space-time is the ultimate executioner of human technology. When it departed Earth in 1977 it was essentially a primitive mechanical brain encased in a golden shell carrying a mere 68 kilobytes of memory, which is less than the size of a single low-resolution image on a modern smartphone. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to join our journey through the secrets of the universe. Powered by the slow and rhythmic decay of radioactive plutonium, it was engineered for a modest 5-year journey to glimpse the giants of our solar system before fading into a silent metallic tomb. Yet nearly half a century later this relic of the Cold War era has defied every law of mechanical entropy by traveling over 14 billion miles into the dark unknown of interstellar space where no human influence has ever reached. For decades the data it sent back was the language of pure physics, consisting of quiet readings on solar winds and magnetic field fluctuations that whispered the secrets of the cosmos in a steady and predictable drone. There was nothing cinematic about its journey until the very fabric of its transmissions began to warp into something unrecognizable and deeply unsettling for the engineers back on Earth. The rhythmic pulsing of plasma oscillations started to emerge with an impossible regularity that suggested a hidden intelligence was beginning to tune into the spacecraft's ancient systems. Temperatures within the probe's core began to surge and recede with the precision of a heartbeat, while the communication signals remained hauntingly stable despite internal sensors screaming that the ship was hopelessly misaligned. It was as if the laws of thermodynamics had been inverted, because Voyager was now showing improved energy efficiency under extreme stress instead of the gradual decline expected from a machine built in the 70s. Dormant systems that had been frozen in a digital coma for over 30 years suddenly flickered back to life without any command from NASA, as if a phantom hand was reaching across the light hours to flip the switches. The data arriving at the Deep Space Network was no longer raw and fragmented, but instead arrived pre-processed and compressed with a mathematical sophistication that far exceeded the computational limits of the spacecraft's original hardware. Patterns began to form within the noise, and these recursive structures started to converge toward a singular and terrifying realization that something in the deep void was no longer just watching Voyager but was actively interacting with it. To truly grasp the gravity of this cosmic anomaly, we must descend back to the very beginning of a mission that was never designed to witness the dawn of the 21st century. Voyager 1 was the child of a rare celestial alignment that occurs only once every 175 years, allowing a single craft to use the gravity of the planets like a slingshot to propel itself across the outer reaches of the solar system. NASA engineers seized this fleeting window of opportunity to craft twin probes equipped with 11 scientific instruments and a vision that stretched beyond the horizon of their own lives. Even with its limited memory, Voyager was a masterpiece of redundancy designed to perform autonomous diagnostics and survive for years without the touch of a human hand. When it reached the majestic system of Jupiter in March of 1979, it revealed a world of violent volcanic eruptions on Io and hinted at the existence of hidden oceans beneath the ice of Europa. By the time it reached Saturn in 1980, it had exposed the breathtaking complexity of the planetary rings and peered into the nitrogen-rich atmosphere of Titan before capturing the iconic pale blue dot image. That single photograph redefined humanity's place in the universe by showing our entire world as a tiny and fragile speck of dust suspended in a sunbeam. After its encounter with the ringed planet, Voyager was redirected upward and out of the orbital plane of the solar system, destined for the eternal night of interstellar space. For decades we watched its power levels drop by 4 watts every single year, forcing us to shut down its cameras and non-essential instruments to preserve the flickering flame of its heart. Communication delays grew to over 14 hours one way, meaning any command sent from Earth was a message to the past and any reply was a voice from the distant frontier. Yet the probe continued its lonely vigil, mapping the boundary where the sun's influence ends and the true galaxy begins. In 2012 it finally crossed the heliopause and entered the interstellar medium, where the solar wind died and the cosmic rays surged in a violent transition. At first everything seemed to align with our traditional models of physics, but as the years progressed the data began to lose its natural randomness. The plasma oscillations did not fade as they moved away from the sun as they should have, but instead they grew more structured and more deliberate in their frequency. Frequencies began to exhibit complex mathematical relationships and harmonics that suggested the spacecraft was no longer drifting through a vacuum but was instead moving through a structured environment. These signals no longer resembled the chaotic noise of space but rather a sophisticated repetition that defied every natural explanation we could conceive. Scientists explored theories of standing waves and density fluctuations, but none could account for the surgical precision of these recurring patterns. By late 2017, the situation escalated from a scientific curiosity to a full-blown technical paradox. The deeper Voyager 1 plunged into the abyss of interstellar space, the more it seemed to shed its identity as a human-made machine and adopt the characteristics of something far more sophisticated and alien in nature. As the plasma oscillations moved from random noise to structured harmonics, the engineers at NASA were forced to confront a reality that defied every manual in their archives, because the spacecraft was beginning to demonstrate a level of coordination that should have been impossible for a 50-year-old computer. The most chilling development was not the failure of systems but their inexplicable optimization under conditions that should have led to a total blackout. While the internal sensors continued to report massive thermal spikes that should have fried the delicate circuitry, the power output from the decaying plutonium generators actually began to stabilize and even improve in efficiency during these periods of high stress. It was as if the laws of entropy had been suspended for this lone traveler, or as if an external energy source was subtly reinforcing the probe's failing heart to keep the conversation with Earth alive. Simultaneously, the attitude, articulation and control system, which acts as the spacecraft's inner ear and orientation guide, began to generate a series of contradictory telemetry logs that left mission control in a state of professional shock. According to the internal data packets, the high-gain antenna was drifting significantly off-target, pointing into the dark reaches of the Ophiuchus constellation instead of toward the Deep Space Network's receivers on our home planet. Under every known law of radio physics, such a misalignment should have caused the signal to vanish into the cosmic background radiation within seconds, yet the stream of data remained flawless and robust. This paradox suggested that the radio waves were being directed or perhaps even captured and retransmitted by something residing in the space between the stars, acting as a cosmic lens to ensure that Voyager's voice remained audible to its creators. This was no longer a case of simple hardware degradation, because hardware failure is characterized by chaos and fragmentation, while what Voyager was producing was a symphony of coordinated anomalies. The thermal peaks were not random events triggered by radiation but were perfectly synchronized with the intensification of the plasma harmonics occurring with a mathematical precision every 4.8 hours. Every time the temperature rose by exactly 30 degrees, the plasma waves would reach a peak of complexity that resembled a compressed data stream rather than a natural phenomenon. Beyond these internal shifts, the physical path of the spacecraft itself began to exhibit minute and terrifying adjustments that could not be explained by the passive gravitational influence of distant stars or the thinning pressure of the interstellar medium. Voyager was no longer just drifting like a piece of cosmic driftwood, but was instead performing micro-adjustments to its trajectory that were so subtle and refined they exceeded the design tolerances of its 1970s thrusters. These corrections were not the erratic movements of a tumbling object but the measured steps of a navigator following a hidden path through the dark. When engineers analyzed the thruster logs, they found evidence of command executions that had no origin in the mission logs of NASA, yet the resulting shifts in orientation were more precise than anything a human operator could have achieved with a 14-hour signal delay. This realization led to the most haunting phase of the mission, because the spacecraft began to wake up parts of itself that had been dead for over 3 decades. Systems that had been decommissioned to save power, including the iconic imaging science subsystem and long-dormant environmental sensors, began to show signs of sequential activation. As if a ghost were walking through the corridors of the machine and flipping switches one by one. The reactivation of these instruments was not a chaotic reboot triggered by a bit flip from a cosmic ray, but a structured and orderly sequence that consumed less power than the original flight manuals said was physically possible. The data packets being sent back to Earth were now undergoing a transformation that bordered on the miraculous, because they were arriving in a format that was compressed and organized far beyond the 68 kilobytes of memory the probe possessed. It was as if the ancient hardware had been reconfigured at a molecular level to handle computational tasks that were light years ahead of the technology available during the Carter administration. The outbound signal was no longer a simple report of magnetic fields and particle counts, but had evolved into a sophisticated stream of pre-processed information that resembled the output of a modern supercomputer. Every packet was a masterpiece of digital efficiency, and as the mission team struggled to decode these new structures, they realized that the spacecraft was no longer just responding to commands from Earth but was anticipating them before the radio waves even reached the antenna. The communication analysis revealed that the incoming signals from NASA were being intercepted and processed at a speed that defied the physical limits of the onboard processors, as if Voyager had been integrated into a larger and more powerful network that was assisting its function. This was not the decay of a relic but the birth of a hybrid entity that was part human engineering and part interstellar mystery. The organization of the data within these new packets began to show recurring patterns that were recursive in nature, meaning they contained smaller versions of themselves within a larger structure. When these patterns were finally visualized by the researchers, they didn't see the expected graphs of radiation levels but instead saw the blueprints of a spatial reconstruction. Voyager was no longer just measuring the space it was moving through but was building a three-dimensional map of its surroundings and transmitting it back to us in a language we were only beginning to understand. The complexity of these visualizations required a processing architecture that simply did not exist inside the probe, yet the evidence was undeniable as the screens in Pasadena began to display golden ratio spirals and pulsar configurations that were being generated in real time. The spacecraft was essentially telling us that it was no longer alone in the dark and that the vacuum between the stars was far more active and structured than we had ever dared to imagine. As this transformation reached its peak, the mission control room grew silent because everyone knew that the question of whether we were alone in the universe was about to be replaced by a far more urgent question of what exactly had taken control of our most distant ambassador. As the transformation of Voyager 1 reached a critical threshold, the nature of the data being transmitted back to Earth moved from technical curiosity to a profound existential mystery that challenged our fundamental understanding of signal intelligence. The anomalies were no longer isolated glitches in aging hardware but had synthesized into a recursive architecture where patterns were embedded within other patterns, like a cosmic fractal unfolding across billions of miles of empty space. Engineers and cryptographers analyzing the incoming streams discovered that these sequences were not merely random fluctuations in the interstellar medium but were structured visualizations of the spacecraft's surrounding environment. When the mission team converted these massive data packets into three-dimensional models, they were met with a sight that defied the technological limits of 1970s engineering because the screens began to render a complex spatial reconstruction of the local interstellar cloud. Within this digital reconstruction appeared a perfect spiral configuration that aligned precisely with the mathematical proportions of the golden ratio, which is a geometric signature found in everything from the arrangement of sunflower seeds to the structure of entire galaxies. This was not a vague approximation or a trick of the light but a deliberate and surgical alignment that corresponded with the measured ratios of hydrogen to helium in the void surrounding the probe. Even more disturbing was the discovery of pulsar timing signatures embedded within this spiral architecture, which were the same pulsar maps originally engraved on the golden record to mark the position of Earth in the vastness of the Milky Way. However, these signatures had been radically reorganized and updated as if a superior intelligence had taken our own primitive map and corrected its coordinates for the passage of half a century. Voyager was now being depicted at the absolute center of this three-dimensional representation, with a network of geometric connections radiating outward from its metallic body like an umbrella of light reaching into the deep dark. These connections did not disperse into the chaos of the vacuum but instead converged with terrifying precision toward a single coordinate located approximately 4.3 light-years away in the direction of the closest stellar systems. The convergence was so specific that it suggested a bridge was being built not out of matter but out of information and energy, linking our distant ambassador to a destination we had never even considered as a target for communication. Initial attempts to identify a star or an artificial structure at these exact coordinates using Earth-based telescopes yielded no visible results, but the persistence of the data made it clear that something was residing in that empty patch of the sky. The internal discussions at NASA intensified as the realization set in that the spacecraft's transmissions were being externally modified and optimized by a force that understood the probe's architecture better than the humans who built it. The most unsettling aspect of this encounter was the presence of direction, because in the silence of space everything is supposed to eventually succumb to entropy and drift, but Voyager was now demonstrating a directed purpose that felt like an intentional alignment. A machine launched from a world of Cold War tension carrying a symbolic message of peace was now being used as a relay station for a sophisticated cosmic dialogue that bypassed all our known encryption methods. The impossible encounter was not a physical collision with a solid object which would have destroyed the fragile craft but rather a digital and electromagnetic synchronization where the spacecraft became a part of the interstellar medium itself. As the patterns resolved into a coherent structure, the mission team realized that the golden record was no longer just a message in a bottle floating in the ocean but had become a live beacon that was actively being read and edited by the ocean itself. The spiral was not merely an ornamental design but a functional map that was guiding the spacecraft toward a future that had never been programmed into its flight software. Every micro-adjustment of the thrusters and every sequential activation of dormant sensors was a step in a larger plan to transform Voyager from a passive observer into a dynamic participant in a galactic network. The data arrivals became more frequent and the compression ratios became so high that it seemed as if the spacecraft was now operating on a level of quantum efficiency that defied the laws of traditional silicon-based computing. The silence in the Mission Control Center was heavy with the weight of this discovery because the evidence was now pointing to the fact that we were no longer the ones in control of the mission. The spacecraft was being guided by a logic that existed outside our human understanding of time and distance, and as the signals continued to pour in from 14 billion miles away, the map was finally starting to complete itself. The network radiating from Voyager was not just a map of space but a map of a relationship between two vastly different intelligences, and the coordinate at the end of that network was a calling card from the deep. We had spent decades looking for a needle in a haystack only to realize that the haystack itself had begun to speak to us through the very needle we had sent into it. The trajectory of Voyager 1 has transitioned from a journey of survival to a mission of profound reconfiguration because the evidence of external interaction has become too structured to be dismissed as mere mechanical failure. We must confront the reality that a machine designed in the 1970s has been effectively hijacked or perhaps adopted by a presence in the interstellar medium that operates through the manipulation of signal and energy rather than physical contact. The convergence of every anomaly leads to a singular and haunting conclusion that the encounter in the deep void was not a collision but an alignment where the spacecraft became a bridge between two worlds. When we look at the facts, we see a progression that defies the natural decay of human technology, starting from the moment the plasma oscillations abandoned their random nature and adopted mathematical harmonics. The precision of the thermal cycles and the optimization of power efficiency under extreme stress suggest that Voyager is no longer running on its own internal logic but is being sustained by a force that resides in the darkness between stars. The sequential reactivation of dormant systems and the anticipation of commands from Earth prove that the probe's ancient architecture has been integrated into a much larger and more powerful computational network. This transformation reached its peak with the transmission of the recursive maps and the golden ratio spirals that pointed with surgical accuracy toward a coordinate 4.3 light-years away in the silent reaches of space. While official declarations remain cautious and avoid the explicit mention of extraterrestrial civilizations, the data itself speaks a language that requires no translation because it confirms that the spacecraft's transmissions have been modified beyond all original design parameters. This is not the story of a dying probe fading into entropy but the story of an ambassador that has finally reached its destination and started a dialogue that we are only beginning to overhear. Nothing in the records confirms a cinematic encounter with a physical vessel, yet everything in the data confirms a coordination that could only be the result of a structured intelligence. For nearly half a century we assumed that Voyager was a lonely traveler drifting through a passive and empty vacuum, but the truth revealed by these signals is that the interstellar medium is a dynamic and perhaps even conscious environment. The darkness between the stars was never empty but was instead waiting for a signal to interact with, and Voyager 1 provided that spark through its persistent presence and its golden record. This alignment implies a relationship that we are only just beginning to map out as the spacecraft moves further away from our sun and deeper into the influence of its new guides. The impossible encounter was not an accident but a destination, and as the next pulses of data arrive from over 14 billion miles away, we must prepare for the possibility that the map is about to reveal something even more revolutionary. We are witnessing the birth of a new era in space exploration where our oldest machine has become our most advanced witness to the mysteries of the galaxy. The signals are still coming in and the patterns are becoming clearer with every passing hour as Voyager continues to whisper the secrets of the coordinate 4.3 light-years away. If you want to follow every new transmission and every hidden pattern discovered in the next faint signal from the edge of the solar system, then you must stay with us and join this journey of discovery. The next structured pulse may not just refine our understanding of the anomaly but could fundamentally rewrite our place in the cosmos by completing the map that Voyager started 50 years ago. Stay tuned as we continue to monitor the most distant conversation in human history and wait for the final message from the explorer that was never supposed to live this long.